We are talking about how to turn your market research into content this week, Jana.
Yeah,
How do you feel about that?
I love it. I love this topic. It's so good. Last week we talked about four different, like very specific strategies that we use. They're not the only ones, but we came up with some to share that people can use to get to know their audience better. And if anyone wants to go back and watch that, that's like sort of part one of this two-part thing. And so
Mhm.
this week, like you said, we're talking about, okay, now that you've done some of that work and gathered that intel, so to speak, from getting to know your audience and what they need and what they want and what they're struggling with and all that good stuff, then how do you actually like bridge that, right? How do you create content from what you've discovered?
Uh-huh. No, I love that. So I don't know what I was just going to say. It just left. But one of the things I think a lot of people struggle with is what content do I create that attracts my ideal customers or clients? And that's why we had the conversation last week around doing market research methodology to do that market research. So if you are listening to this one and you haven't watched or listened to that one, feel free to go back and do that. And then this conversation might help pull all the pieces together of what we're going to talk about. Hello, Tamisha.
Hey, Tamisha.
And Jana's just going to lead it off. So
Sure.
you have an example, I think, or something that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple things to talk about. I think the first thing I wanted to kind of like lead with, I had an interesting experience in my Facebook group, the Facebook group that I use to support my course students. So inside High Leverage Content, my signature course, it is a course with support. And so what that means is that you're not out there alone, even though it is a course and it is fully DIY. If you have questions and you need, clarity about something or you need to bounce an idea around or whatever, we have the Facebook group. We also have monthly calls right now through 2024. But the Facebook group is really good. And one of my students was in the Facebook group yesterday and she came in and she said that she was kind of like struggling because in high leverage content, in a lot of different places, I'm saying that I want you to like tap into what you know about your audience, right? Like what they want, very badly, like what they're up at night thinking about as far as like things they don't want or what they do want, things they're struggling with, the things that they believe are between them and the things that they want, really. And like knowing that. And she was saying, I don't though. She's like, I don't know that. So like, what do I do? And it's interesting because I definitely think that sometimes people truly don't know because they're really just getting started. But I think that 9 times out of 10, when you think that maybe you don't know, I would suggest that actually you do know a lot more than you think you do. And I think you should give yourself more credit. And I told her this for what you do know about your audience. And it's easy to think like, oh, well, I'm always getting like I have more to learn. I need to listen more. I need to find more people that want this thing that I offer and figure out, how it solves a problem for them and that kind of thing. But I told her, and I'm kind of on a ramble here, so I'm going to stop in a second. But I basically told her that like I really think that she does know more than she's giving herself credit for. And sometimes it's really just a question of like, we're all always getting deeper clarity about our audiences. Like literally, I just finished up or I'm finishing up a launch. Today's the last day of my launch. And during these last couple of weeks that my cart's been open, I've had a couple of small epiphanies and I've been in business for 8 years, talking to
Yeah.
people about content strategy and marketing and whatnot. But I've had a couple of like aha moments that have given me even deeper clarity than I had before on my audience. So I wanted to just like say, because I made a mental note to like talk about this in live today, that I think give yourself more credit, give yourself credit for what you do know and realize that like two things can be true at once. You need to hold space for both things, that you are always getting deeper clarity. Even I am always getting deeper clarity. Heather is, Oprah is, Beyonce is, like we're all always getting to know our audiences better, but you also already know a lot and you can trust yourself to use the intel that you do have to then turn around and create content. So take what you have, realize you're always going to be getting more, but use what you have now. Don't get stuck and feel like you always need to learn more before you create content because that's not how it works. You got to get out there and, kind of do it messy to some degree. Um, So I kind of just like wanted to mention that. And the other thing that she said that I thought was interesting that I just wanted to bring up is that she asked like if it made sense to be tapping into her own like the problems that she faced and faces. She's a coach for writers, and so as a writer, what does she experience? And I said to her, absolutely, like that is a big part of what we end up doing when we've created an offer that is around something that we figured out for our own business and also helped other people with, but also, like I said, figured out for our own business. So I think it's really good to remember that when in doubt, as you're gaining more and more knowledge of your ideal audience and what they need, also lean on what you need and what you needed when you were in their shoes. And that'll give you like a really good start for creating your content as well. So, okay, that was a little bit of a rant. Hopefully I didn't lose everybody, but I wanted to set the stage with that little nugget, basically.
Oh, I think that's really good because I think people do stop themselves from creating content because they don't know what to say. But then when they have ideas of what to say, they might be judging themselves based on that.
Mhm.
Or they have that excuse of, well, I don't actually know what the answers are. When if they were to sit with themselves for just a little bit and ask the right questions, they probably would be able to answer them. So I think
Mhm.
that's really powerful. I'm glad that you did that bit of coaching with her. And I hope that that turns out favorable for her.
Mhm. Yeah, she's already like kind of back into action. Um, and speaking of back into action and speaking of asking yourself the right questions,
Mhm.
she is after that, bit of coaching, like you called it, or that mindset shift kind of, she is back into the curriculum. And that's kind of like the strategy that is at the heart of how I have done this for myself and how I teach it.
Mhm.
Um, in high leverage content, I have what I call the 9 and 2 content pillars. And these are the 9 things that I have learned from many years of experience with my own business and other people's content. The 9 things that people really need to learn here and understand more deeply before they're ready to buy. And so the way that I teach it inside high leverage content is basically taking your market research and also your own brain as well. And also we use ChatGPT for some brainstorming too. I teach
Mhm.
some prompts and some ways to do that, which we talked about in the last session, the last live. But to take that and basically kind of like map the things that your audience is saying, whether it's your audience or people you're listening to. Remember, that's the other thing is like if you don't already have a big audience yourself, if you only have, a smaller email list, if you only have had 2 clients or you haven't had clients yet, there's always an audience to listen to. You can always go, like we talked about last week, to Facebook groups and other places to do your social listening. Once you've done that, once you've used one of the 4 techniques that we talked about last week or something different that also works, taking all those ideas that you've generated based on what you've heard from the people from their mouths, right? And mapping those over to whatever your content pillars are. And for me, the ones that I teach, the 9 and 2 content pillars are, inside of high leverage content. But I think that's the system that people really need to have in their own business. And you can use my system or you can use a different system, but having a way to take that and map it over to the content that you want to create um, is kind of the key to now taking what you know and turning it into content, right? It's not like magic, it's a process I teach, obviously, but that's the thing is that you need some kind of process. And again, it doesn't have to be mine, but mapping it over to what you want to create and what you want to talk about in your content. You have a funny face. You're on mute too.
Sorry, I was
No?
troubleshooting something in our live studio because it was like frozen and I was just like, what is going on? Are
Uh-oh.
we still live?
Oh, are we?
No, yeah, we're live.
Okay.
It was just, I think my internet, like it, it paused.
I got you.
Sorry.
No, no worries. No
We're
worries.
still here.
Yeah, no,
No,
go ahead.
I think that's really great. And I like the framework and how thought out it is. And one of the questions that came to mind for me, if anyone is listening and has the interest in enrolling in Jana's HLC program, high leverage content in the future, are your videos or is your course material a mix of like videos and written? Like, how do you
Oh.
teach, Jana? I've always wondered.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's more videos than anything because I use slides and I use like, especially because a lot of my HLC is very formulaic. Um,
Hmm.
so because of that, um, I have frameworks that I teach from. And so I want like visual representations of those frameworks. And then I'll use like slides with bullets sometimes as well. So I try to mix it up and keep the videos like quick, you know. But generally speaking, I'd say it's mostly videos. But then the other piece of what's inside is like the tools, the HLC tools. So we have tools that are things like checklists and the actual master content tracker, things like that. I have a workbook for the first half where you're doing your strategy and planning. So it's videos and then there's like tools.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a tangent, but I do all my tools these days for my courses in Google Docs and Google Drive because I used to do like fancy PDFs and whatnot, but they're such a pain to like download and then do you print them or are they fillable? And it's always so awkward to fill a PDF and then print it or not print it or save it or whatever. So at some point I was just like, Google Drive is so good for this. So I just make all my
And
worksheets
then
and checklists and resources in Google Drive, whether it's Google Sheets or Google Docs. So,
I love that because you can retroactively keep it up to date.
right.
So any new members that purchase in the future get all the updates.
Mhm. Yep,
Yeah,
totally.
I
And my
love that.
students like it too because every once in a while you kind of like want to start over, you know what I mean? Or even like this is totally a tangent, but with HLC, it's a system that you can use in your business for months and years into the future because you
Yeah.
have an offer now and you're creating content for that offer. But 2 years from now, or even a year from now, you may have a different offer. It may be in addition to your old offer, or maybe you transitioned or whatever, right? And so you can go back anytime and create a suite of content that sells that offer, the new one, anytime you want. And so you can go into Teachable, in my case, is where I host the course. And if you hit the link again, it'll make you a brand new copy of the workbook and everything. You know what I mean? So you don't have to
Yeah.
like save as or something and like delete everything from the last time. So Google Drive is just like where it's at for those types of things. So anyway, major tangent, but
No, that's okay. So organizing your market research in your process, including pain points and desires and creating content out of that. And if you have done your market research, these things should stick out to you. So, some things might be like, you know, a silly one for me is simply like, how do I stay consistent pinning on Pinterest?
Mhm.
It always comes up
Yeah,
in
totally.
almost every single conversation I have. It comes up.
Yep.
So that's why I ultimately created a product around that
Yeah.
for staying consistent and, always knowing what you have to pin and what you need to pin and creating pin plans and things like that. So if you've done this part, you should be able to create content on that.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of like map it over to what you know you want to create. So for example, you know you want to create, a few YouTube videos in the next, couple of, month or whatnot that talk about certain pain points, right? So you can go back over to your market research and actually look for that. Like, okay, what are these reoccurring pain points? And you just mentioned one in your business, for example. And literally turning that into content. Now, there's kind of like two ways that I think about this. One is turning that into the topics that you're going to create content about.
Mhm.
And then the other one is turning it into copy,
Yeah.
right? So you just described where you're seeing that people are consistently struggling with consistency about how to stay consistent pinning. So you're going to create at least one piece of long form content about that. So that's
Mhm.
a topic, right? And then the other way that it's not the only other way, but another distinctly different but related way that we tap into that market research is by looking at the words that people are using
Mhm.
and literally using those words as the copy that you're going to put in something. So for a YouTube video, maybe that's the copy that you use in your outline or your script where you start off a video saying like, do you wonder, what the best ways are to stay consistent with Pinterest pins? Or are you feeling like, you were consistent with Pinterest for like 2 weeks, but then you fell off or something, right? Like you can
That
use that as
happens.
that. You can use that as the copy for your thumbnails for your YouTube videos. You can use that. Like I use those types of pieces of copy a lot for like the introductions to my blog posts so that when someone lands on my blog, they see right away what's in it for them. They know exactly what I'm addressing and they're like, yeah, that's me. I need that kind of thing.
Mhm.
You can use it for, I use it in emails all the time. And it's usually going to be, a subject line and probably in the first couple of paragraphs of the email presenting Like, I know you struggle with this, or I know you want this, or I know you believe that this thing is true,
Yeah.
about that gets between you and getting what you want. So you can use those pieces as your copy too.
Yeah. This relates somehow back to a previous live that we did, this conversation.
Yeah.
Because you were
Oh,
talking
yep.
about
I gotcha.
your framework for high leverage content and pulling those pain points out, pulling those desires out, and then creating content. But how does that relate back to the previous conversation that we've had here before with the alignment and relevance and ease? If you have a pain point that maybe doesn't fit into that framework, how do you make that work?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So going back to high leverage content, the system that we're using basically is, you have 9 pillars. You're
Mhm.
mapping your market research. And sometimes when I say market research, I don't always mean like, a market research session where you did a survey. Like it doesn't have to be that. It's just what we talked about last week, which is just always setting aside time to observe your people, observe your audience, see what they're saying, see what they're struggling with, right? Ideally recording it somewhere. Like I mentioned last week, I have a notebook of all this stuff. I also have like a spreadsheet where I keep all of my onboarding forms to ask people why they joined, things like that. So ideally you're recording them somewhere in some way and then mapping them over, right? So you mapping them over, if you're following my system, to the 9 content pillars. And then we actually brainstorm lots and lots of ideas for each content pillar, but then we go through and we rate each of the ideas in each of the 9 categories
Mhm.
using what you just described, which is the ARE score and select method, is what I call it. This is one of those frameworks that I have a slide about.
Yeah.
So it's basically asking yourself, how aligned is this? Meaning like how closely does it relate to my actual offer? Because people tend to make the mistake of creating content that they just want to create, but it's not really super aligned with like their paid offer, which is
Mhm.
a problem if you want to make sales. How relevant is this to my ideal audience? That's the big one, really, that relates a lot to this, what we're talking about today. And then the ease is like, how easy is it going to be for you to go in detail? Because we do long form content in HLC. And so you need to be able to go into detail on this topic. This can't be a topic that your audience wants, but like it's just not really something you want to write a lot about or know a lot about, right? It's got to be easy for you, not
Yeah.
just easy to do it, but easy for you to go deep. So long story short, there's I teach more on that obviously, but you rate each of your ideas and you use this objective system to choose the best ones that are going to be the most high converting. And the one in the middle is the R, the relevance.
Mhm.
And when you are taking time to get to know your audience in whatever way you want to, we talked about 4 ways last week, but there's other ways as well. When it's time to say, okay, how relevant is this to my ideal audience? How important do they think this is?
Mhm.
The implicit question there too is like, is this really important to them? Or is this just something that's important to me, but might not catch their attention because it's not really related to like a problem they have or
Yeah.
something they deeply desire or whatnot, right? Um, that's where that kind of process comes in where you're evaluating. And it's a lot easier to evaluate, especially on that R factor, the relevance, when you are regularly taking time to observe and get to know your audience. So
Mhm.
that's where that factors in there. And we did a live stream back in a couple months ago, I think, that was called, I think you have it in front of you. Do you have it in front of you? I'll pull it up if not.
Oh, let me pull my WhatsApp back up.
Yeah, I had written it down in my notes. I got it. I got it too. We did a live stream that
My content
was
isn't getting me clients.
right. My content isn't getting me clients. Exactly. 3 content marketing mistakes coaches make. So if anybody wants to watch that and learn more about that ARE and how we rate all of our ideas based on these factors that are going to make it more high converting. I'll link that video in the description of this video so people can go back and watch that again if they want to.
Yeah.
But that's how it plays in, and that's how we leverage that market research that we're doing, whether it's combination of formal market research, informal listening, whatever it is, to make good decisions and good judgments about how relevant this is to our audiences. So that's where that kind of hooks back into the system, if that makes sense.
So something that I kind of bookmarked in my mind as you were talking is in relation to doing your market research, which again, we talked about last week. I don't mean to beat you guys over the head with
I
it.
know.
Um,
I've said it like 8 times. I'm sorry.
but it was such a good conversation. You should definitely listen to it. But when you do your market research, this is why when you are doing, like you're judging your market research against something like what Jana's saying in that live, she's going to relink the ARE framework, alignment, relevant, and ease. It's so important that you are actually talking to the right people when you do this market research, because you could come up with a list of things that are actually not going to be relevant for everyone. And that might, if you, I have made this mistake, I'm sure others have made this mistake, where you've kind of listened to the wrong people, you've created the wrong content, and then there's crickets. And
Mhm.
it's like, what's happening? I was getting some, forward momentum, and now it's kind of paused or stalled out. And you kind of have to revisit that research that you did, that content creation strategy that you did, your messaging, and making sure that all of that is lined up. It's really easy to get off track here.
Yes, it really is. And
You
sometimes it
really do.
happens. Yeah, sometimes it happens like on social media, which is why, again, last week's live stream was so good, and you should listen to it if you haven't. Um, you talked specifically about, you gave us exact language that we can use when we're asking people for feedback on social media that makes sure that ensures that you're going to get mostly feedback from the right people, people who actually meet a certain criteria, rather than just throwing a general question out there and getting all kinds of responses from people who are not your ideal audience. And
Yeah.
then you're going to get some that aren't, but you just need to like kind of filter that out and remember that they aren't. Like for example, on threads, there's like a lot of, I noticed that I am connected on threads with a lot of people who are like a little bit more advanced and not really in the same place as my ideal clients are, which
Mhm.
is my ideal clients are mostly people, most of my HLC students are people who are like deeply experienced and have a lot of expertise, but they're still really like mastering the marketing basics. And so if I ask a question about how marketing is for you and I get a bunch of responses from people who are other marketers, for example, that
Yeah.
are more like me, those aren't going to be the things that I want to use to create my content, because
Yeah.
those aren't going to resonate with the people that I know I've created my program for, you know?
Yeah.
So good point.
No, that makes total sense. And that's why I don't, when I'm looking to create content for my audience, I'm not necessarily looking to ask Pinterest managers what they want to learn,
Hmm.
because I am one. And chances are what they need to learn and what someone like Shelly needs to learn is actually different.
Hmm.
And Shelly's hanging out with us in the chat too. I don't know if she's still here or not, but she was, because she said hi.
Yeah. Shelly,
But
our
it's
friend
kind of,
Shelly, the low carb coach.
yeah, it's kind of that same process though, right? It's making sure that you are listening and creating for the right people that are ultimately going to buy from you, and not necessarily just,
Right.
wanting to help you out because they're feeling nice.
Yeah. Or not. Or they are want to answer
Yeah.
the question because they feel a certain way about it.
Yeah.
Um, and that brings us back to the beginning too. Like, yes, make sure you're creating your content for the right audience, but also be careful because you can get into like this like place of overthinking it as well. Sorry, just checking my nose.
All good.
Okay. You can get it. Sorry, I had long story short, I had a little nose problem last night. You can get into a place of overthinking it and then get stuck and be like, oh shoot, if I don't know for sure if I'm creating it for the right people, then maybe I won't create it. And that's not good either. You don't want to get stuck.
Yeah.
So, you want to make sure you either have a system to follow that'll keep you unstuck, or have people around you that'll help you get unstuck if you feel that way. But when in doubt, like do it messy and create the content. And then, clarity comes from action. You're going to learn more about who your people are and who they aren't when you're actually out there in the trenches doing the work, putting the content out there and seeing how people respond to it.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great. And just a good reminder as you are out in the trenches doing the work. Um, it really just comes down to going for it, Jana. I really do think that even if you do end up creating content that maybe doesn't hit, it's a good learning lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that people just aren't in that phase of their journey right now, and the content you created maybe was too advanced or maybe even too immature for where they're at. So
Yep.
I think it's a spectrum, and we have to remember that this whole process is a spectrum, and our ideal clients are on a spectrum.
Mhm.
So just going for it, I think at the end of the day, creating the content, making the Instagram post, writing the email,
Mhm. Yeah.
seeing what happens is going
Yeah.
to empower you more to just continue creating.
Exactly. Clarity comes from that action, and living your brand out loud in the world is what my client Kay used to say. But like it doesn't, it's like almost like your content, your ideas, your brand, none of it
Yeah.
really exists until it comes into contact with real humans, and then you can kind of see how it lands. And it's interesting because I believe that my program, HLC, high leverage content, removes a lot of the guesswork from this process. And
Mhm.
I believe that guesswork is what like burns us out and, keeps us not efficient. So there is like this balance between like, I do think if you have a system to follow, you can remove some of the guesswork or most of it, but you're never really truly going to be able to remove all the guesswork because you still do need to just get into action and do it. And that's kind of like what I was telling my student earlier yesterday, that like you can trust yourself. You know what I mean? Like you know enough to make good decisions, to create content, put it out there and see how it lands and move forward. You do, like you do know enough. Um,
Yeah.
we always we always know enough, and yet yes, we are also always getting deeper and deeper clarity. So
Yeah.
um the other thing that I think we wanted to talk about before we start to think about wrapping is that, and this is really important, is that when you are doing your market research based on like, again, one of the 4 strategies we reviewed last week, or if you have your own, getting the real words that your audience is using and then using those real words
Mhm.
is so powerful. And I think one of the kind of like rookie mistakes that a lot of marketers make for a long time until one day it clicks and they realize that like this is a mistake and they need to do it differently is that they see what their audience is saying, but they reword it in a way where it gets to the point where now it makes sense to them, the creator, right? The marketer, and it's clear from their perspective, but they've basically abandoned the words that their audience member used that they were inspired by for this piece of content. And so,
Mhm.
to whatever degree possible, and I have a hard time with this myself. So I relate so hard to people who are like, oh, yes, that's me. Whenever you can, and to whatever degree possible, using the words that your audience is using and not like rewriting it to be lingo or jargon or just words that make more sense to you, the person who is several steps ahead of them in most cases, is going to be really, really valuable. So I have an example that I highlighted, Heather, just to go over if that works for
Yeah.
you.
Let's do it.
So I pulled up my onboarding forms, which is one of the ways that I get intel from people. I use these onboarding forms to understand where they're at and like what they want to do inside the program,
Yeah.
because it just helps me serve them better. But as an extra benefit of that, I get to see their words, right?
Yep.
So one of the questions I ask in that really short onboarding form is, did you have any hesitations before you enrolled? And one person wrote, I knew I needed/wanted the program to feel confident in writing content and putting it out there. Because without a specific and strategic plan, I just wasn't willing to put anything out there because it felt like a waste of time without knowing what I needed to say to convert clients.
Oh, I relate to this so hard. Please continue.
Yeah. And then the second half of what she said is, but I have been promised things in courses before and they didn't follow through with
Mhm.
providing what they said they would, once bitten, twice shy. So that was like the hesitation part. So for me, if I was taking this and writing content about it, it would be um, tempting for me to kind of reword the thing that she wrote about wasting time and to not talk about the idea that you feel like you're wasting time on content because you don't know what to say to convert clients. And instead I would make it more lingo or jargony or something and say something like, you need a really strategic plan. You need to be more strategic. Or you don't have, hours every day to create content and be an Instagram queen or something like that. And those things are related, but they're not exactly cutting to the heart of what she's saying. The way to
Mhm.
cut to the heart of what people are saying is to actually use the same words, right? She says, I don't
Yeah.
want to waste time. And so even though it kind of went against my grain to just throw it out there and be like, you don't want to waste time. I wrote an email that basically said that you don't want to waste time. And it performed really well, obviously, because
Mhm.
this was the actual real thing that people were thinking. I mean, you even just said like, oh my God, I relate to that, right? But
Mhm.
it's not super like intuitive for me to write it that way. I would have written it a different way if I were using my own words. So just coming back to the idea of always trying to hold yourself accountable to use their words.
Mhm.
And then also she said, I've been promised things in courses before and they didn't follow through with providing what they said they would, once bitten, twice shy. I actually wrote an email in my most recent launch, and some people who are listening to this on the replay or now might even have seen that email, where I started off the email and I literally used these words that she said. You've been promised things in courses before and they didn't follow through with providing what they said they would, or, this didn't work for you. And I wrote an email that talked about 3 reasons why I hear from students that they enrolled in another program, it didn't work. And each of those reasons is a legit reason why they think what that I've heard people encountering out there. And then I talk about, HLC and like why it's not like that and what it is like and why this is going to be a better move for you. And then at the end, I signed off on it by saying something like, when I brought it back to the pitch at the end, I said, so, it's like safe for you. If you related to the 3 things that I talked about above,
Mhm.
please know that it's safe for you to let go of your once bitten, twice shy hesitancy and, enroll and come in and, get this offer promise, learn how to create content that converts your audience to clients in half the time. So I actually use this language exactly as it was in a lot of ways. My student actually ended up like, helping me write an email basically. And
Yeah.
I do the same thing with blog posts. So yeah, I just think it's important to remember to, I know I've said this like 8 times, but basically to make sure you're really using their language, even though it's tempting to fluff it up or make more sense to your brain. What makes sense to your audience's brain is exactly the words they're using. That's why they use those words.
Yeah. And if one person's feeling that way and thinking those thoughts, then chances are more people are feeling that way and thinking those thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I think that's a really great example. And I'm so glad that you shared that with us.
Yeah.
It's
I
good.
know sometimes it's like, I think that actually might have been one of the 3 things that I talked about in that email, which is that
Mhm.
sometimes you get into a course and like it doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't give you, the real examples and the real like step by steps. So that's
Mhm.
just, you know, if someone is hearing me say, use their words, like you've heard that before, but actually looking at an example of that, I think really does bring it to life. So good.
Yeah. It's part of the reason why I tell people when you're creating, like in my program for Pinterest, um, literally just use the keywords that you find on Pinterest for your pin titles and text overlays.
It's so
Those are the
related to that.
words that people are
Right.
telling Pinterest that they
Right.
are searching for.
Yep.
Pinterest is giving you that information for free.
Right. Exactly.
Just
That's
use
exactly
it.
right. Like I remember, and I use this example, I've used this example before, but I remember like when I worked with the dating coach years ago for her Pinterest profile. And she was like one of my first clients and one of my big success stories. So when we first got on our call together and we were doing keyword research, I was like, what do you think your clients are searching for? And she was like, dating mindset. And I'm like, I don't think so.
No.
They're searching for dating profiles. They're searching for dating after divorce. Like we actually were able to look at Pinterest, right? And know from doing our keyword research, which is one of the things we talked about last week,
Yeah.
what people actually were using as far as words. Dating
Yeah.
mindset's very lingo-y. It's very and it was even more lingo-y, like 4 or 5 years ago when she and I started, first started working together. So
Dating mindset. I never
like,
would ever.
no, that's not what your ladies are saying. They're not like, I need better dating mindset. No, they're not saying that. They're not saying that.
No. They're thinking I need better dates.
Right. I need better men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or women. Yeah.
Yep.
Totally. How funny, dating mindset. We're not laughing at her. We're only chuckling at how we know Pinterest works.
Well, and how human
I love
brains
it.
work, how human
Yeah.
brains work. And you're right. I mean, we're not laughing at her. Like I have the same problem. It's like when you're
Mhm.
dealing with your own business and your own research, it's that expert brain that takes over, And so it happens for me too. I think like, oh, I'm going to talk about strategic content instead of I don't want to waste my time on content that isn't converting. She
Yeah.
thinks, oh, I'm going to think, it's dating mindset. Like we all have this issue where our expert brains take over and we just have to
Yeah.
be aware of it and just mitigate that.
I was telling Teresa this on a voice chat yesterday because she was asking about her clients' ads, and I've done consulting work for this client's ads for 2 years now with Teresa. So anytime she has an issue, she always messages me, and she shot over a voice message, and I was like driving home from my workout, and I was talking back to her, and she sent me a message, and she's like, "What you explained makes so much sense, and I don't understand why I can't just think like that or come up with these answers." And then I responded back to her and I was like, well, I'm always second guessing myself when it comes to teaching ads because like it makes sense in here, but when it comes out of here, it doesn't feel aligned or whatever.
Mhm.
And I just feel like an imposter. So look, even those of us who are, you know, way ahead of you, if you're
Yeah.
listening,
Like you are like an Pinterest ads guru. So like you are not an imposter, but you even have that moment where you feel
yeah,
like an imposter. So
for sure.
yeah.
So I might go back and listen to her message and actually write that down in my post call notes that I have with clients, because I'll refer back to that document occasionally when creating content myself with things that people said on the call. I'll be typing it out while they're, if
Yep.
something just like is so juicy. So I think I might even go back and listen to that and put it in there, because when I do create new content on ads, which I will do at some point, which is why I haven't created a lot of content on ads on this channel in a while, is because of that feeling. Then I
Hmm.
can use her words.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that.
Um,
Yep.
well, I think that about wraps it up for this week. Next week we have a live here scheduled on the channel, and then we're at the end of our rope for content planning. So we will be back next week to chit chat with you, and then we'll be doing some content planning afterwards to get some more stuff on the calendar.
Yep.
So come and chit chat with us next week about Pinterest mistakes rookies make part two. Part
Yep.
two.
Yep.
We always
And
see these mistakes. So we're taking a slight right turn, going back to our roots with Pinterest next week. And then, we hope to see you there.
see what happens after that. But we will be here every Wednesday, barring, the occasional whatever, but every Wednesday at noon Eastern time. We just need to get some topics picked and scheduled. So we'll be dipping back into our own market research to decide what topics we want to
Look at
to
that.
address starting after next week.
Look at that. Okay. We'll see you guys next week. Beautiful. I'm getting